very controversial mayor, and I wonder, I think that what you do is take a lot of risks in a way that other politicians don't. And you're criticized for that. You're very outspoken, you deal with issues that regular municipal officials don't. Why do you do it? What are some of those issues? Why are you such a problem? Why do you have such a problem with people criticizing you?
I don't have the problem, other people have the problem. But I think, I'll tell you why. I mean, it seems to me that when you're an elected official, a public official, you've got to do two things. Number one, you have got to do, to the best of your ability, the job that you're very conservatively and strictly paid to do, all right? We have got to stimulate economic development. We have got to get our streets and sidewalks repaved. We've got to run the city cost effectively and efficiently. We've got to build our sewers. We've got to protect our youth and our elderly and all those things, okay? And we do those things, and you have to do that. If you don't do that, you're being absolutely irresponsible. But I think sometimes when the world becomes sufficiently crazy, it is important for public officials to raise other issues, because if you just do what you're supposed to do, you're going to be like the physician who performed a great operation, a very successful operation, but unfortunately the patient died. Everything that you do is great, but the total picture, the total situation collapses. In other words, if I'm the world's greatest mayor, or South Burlington is the world's greatest local government, and we do everything that we're supposed to do, and there's a nuclear war, what difference does it all make? If young people, out of a sense of alienation, don't know their role in the world and turn to drugs or alcohol, then what does many other things mean? What do many things mean? So I think it is absolutely obligatory for public officials and citizens at large to begin to debate the most important issues facing society. You know, you go back and you read Plato and you see people standing around the old marketplace, you know, talking about what's most important. And what I become very distressed about, whether it's national politics, state politics, and we've tried to correct that locally, is to use government, if you like, and by that I simply mean the coming together of all people, to in fact debate and discuss the most important issues facing our society. If we're not going to do it, who's going to do it? It's not going to be on CBS television, they don't do it. It's not going to be on the radio, they don't do it. They're too busy selling products to make money. That's their function, we understand that. Public access, we hope, will improve the situation. But in general, I think it is appropriate for local government to bring people together to debate the direction that we want society to go to. You know, and sometimes I think people get upset at us in Burlington for doing that. You know why? Because right now, the people who determine the direction of society are wealthy people, are corporations, are people who own the media, who own manufacturing and so forth. They make those decisions. Very quietly they make those decisions by determining what is played on television or on the radio, whether or not we have jobs or we don't have jobs. And they don't want to hear the community itself getting involved in that debate. So I think it is extremely important. You know, one of the frustrations that you have, and just, you know, you see this in a mild way, the legislature is going to be reconvening very shortly. And it astounds me that if one were to look at the problems facing the state of Vermont, and I think many people can agree with me, go A, B, C, D, E, F, these are the problems. And then we could acknowledge that the solutions to those problems are difficult. That's fair enough to acknowledge. But what you're going to see is, my guess will be, the legislature probably won't even touch any of the real basic problems. Okay, for example, if I were to say we have a housing crisis, well, very few people knowledgeable about, who live in the real world in Vermont, would deny we have a housing crisis. Okay, now the truth is it's an expensive solution. How are we going to build thousands of units of affordable housing? Simple enough. Do you think the legislature is going to tackle that problem? I doubt it. But they'll probably piddle around with it and put $1 million into some program which will build us 20 units of housing. And that will be the quote-unquote solution to the problem. It's not a solution. And if you can't solve the problem, at least, let's say, okay, you know, you can't solve it. We don't have the money to solve it. But at least try to say this is the scope of the problem. We can only touch it now, but we acknowledge that this is the scope of the problem. And what frankly drives me crazy is the inability of government to at least acknowledge what the real problems are. You know, you run into, lately we have been talking here in Burlington a whole lot about education, primarily in the terms of the finances of education, because we're very concerned about the so-called foundations foundation plan, which, if adopted by the governor and the legislature, would be absolutely devastating to Burlington. But as I go out and I talk to people, you know, many people raise very interesting questions, even aside from the financial aspects of education. by which it means that you've got to pay teachers a living salary, you need, laboratory and all types of equipment for young people. What are we educating people for? I mean, it's a very simple, dumb bunny question. What do we educate people for? What kind of society do we want to live in? What kind of society do we want to live in? What is a good society? What is a bad society? What are the aspects of our society which are good and positive? What are the aspects of our society which are bad? Recently, a couple of months ago, and you were to Nicaragua and I've been to Nicaragua, but there was a poll that was done. I forgot, one of the national polling groups did it. And what they discovered is that half of the people did not know which side the United States was supporting in the war in Nicaragua. And what is distressing about that is you say, how could that be? It's on the front pages of the newspaper every single day. For years now, Reagan has been talking about the need to destroy the Nicaraguan government, right? It's been one of his highest priorities as recently been amplified. But aside from what one's view is on that issue, and I am very strongly opposed to that war, how could it be that people don't know what's going on in there? So I think it is, to get back to your question, ultimately, what the most important thing is, and people like Thomas Jefferson talked about this, is that society is not going to exist unless people are educated and knowledgeable about where we want to go and how we're doing it. And in truth, we're not doing that now as a society. Certainly the mass media is a disgrace. I mean, sometimes, people have their addictive habits, right? I don't take drugs and these things, but occasionally I have to confess that I get addicted to watching the stupid television. And it is amazing, even when you want to watch it. Even when you're sitting around and say, okay, I'm tired, I can't deal with everything else, I want to sit down and watch the television. It is astounding that you can't even do it because we have the cable thing now, so you have far more selections. And I don't have all of them. I haven't bought all the optional things, but there's millions of stations there, and it's unbelievable. There's still almost, very rarely is there anything of substance to watch. And what I think happens, a very distressing thing happens. Without being a psychologist, what I think happens is that people live through life. I mean, they go through life and have to deal with all of their problems and their reality. Everybody has a reality. And I think what becomes psychologically very damaging is when the reality that people feel in their guts and in their hearts and in their minds is not, it appears that no one else shares that reality, right? So people go through their lives and they turn on television, for example. Is there any indication that their reality exists as manifested on the tube? Very, very little of it. Very little of that. And I think that's very dangerous as a society. We may disagree in everything, but at least let's agree on what is going on in life. And we're not doing that. So I like to see that kind of real discussion take place.
When you go out door knocking in the neighborhoods, which you have a tendency to do around election time, but also you keep in touch pretty well, what do people say to you when you knock on their door? I mean, first of all, it seems to me it takes a lot of courage to knock on someone's door and say, hi, I want to know what you think. How do you approach people, and then what sort of response do you get?
A couple of things. First, it doesn't take a lot of courage. The first time that I did it, the first time I ever knocked on doors in my life was when I ran for mayor in 1981. And let me tell you, I was very frightened about the first few doors that I knocked on. I started off in the Old North End, and you felt very weird. My God, I'm a stranger knocking on somebody's door. They're going to throw hot water on me. They're going to be rude. Am I being, people are busy. And it was very hard. But by now, I probably have knocked on, I don't know how many thousands of doors, many, many thousands of doors, and it is not very difficult. And in Burlington, at least, what you recognize, I suppose if you went to Los Angeles or Boston or New York, people would have to unbolt 18 locks before they let you in, and they think you were a murderer or something. Burlington people are amazingly friendly. I mean, they really are. I mean, and I think that's true of Vermont. Come on in. You hungry? You want something to eat? People have talked to me while they're in the bathtub. I mean, it's almost been, honest to God. I myself was not in the bathroom with me. I wanted to emphasize that. But it's good. It's a nice thing to do. And I really wish that I had more time to do it. You just don't. I mean, it's if you're spending 15 minutes with one person, you don't have the time to go out and meet more people. You don't want to simply spend 3 seconds with people, so you have to work a balance. What you find, one of the amazing things that you find is, in one sense, the diversity of people. Just the other night, I was out knocking on doors in the South End, and you see older people, and I think one of the things that you see and why it's always good for a public official to go out is the reality which sometimes forms here in the mayor's office or even in the Board of Aldermen is not real reality. I mean, people who know how to articulate their concerns, often business community people who are have the staff and the expertise to know what they want, their voices are heard. They're heard in the newspaper, they're heard on television. But the average person, the poor person, very rarely has an understanding of how to make their concerns heard. So you go out and you knock on doors. And just the other day, what you see, especially with the elderly, first of all, there are a number of elderly people in our city, and you see the financial difficulties that they're having, and that's very distressing. Reappraisal has been disastrous to them. They're very frightened about higher property taxes. So you look right away and you see the economic reality of life hitting you right in the face. And it's important to do that in case you ever lose, which I hope I never do, and I don't think I will, but the difficulty that many, many people are having just surviving. You see, that becomes, while governments talk about this concern and that concern, the bottom line, probably the single most important issue, is the fact that many, many, many people just are not making it financially. That's all, period. They're having a hard time knowing how to survive week by week. And we forget that reality. Government very often forgets that reality. So it's good to see that. Mm-hmm. And then, then you go to the next house, and then you have a young parent who is concerned about education in the city of Brooklyn, which is not a concern that somebody who's 75 years old has right now, who is on a fixed income, who has already educated his or her kids. And that's an issue. And then you come into people who may have specific concerns, whether it's the parking problem, or traffic flow in the city, or housing. I mean, there are dozens of different issues, but one of the, amazing things, and beautiful things in a sense, I mean, there are many different people who have many different concerns, and it's what makes kind of life interesting and exciting. But I think one of the things that I would love so much to see, and I would like to see changes in the school system as well, is to get people thinking basically, real basics, about the kind of city, the kind of state, and the kind of world that they want to live in. Because that very rarely happens. And then you get criticized, well, you're a dreamer, you're just an idealist. Somebody's got to do that. I don't mean me or you, but I think the people themselves. For example, when you talk about economics, you talk about finances, the most important thing to understand about financial matters in the United States is that we have the capability of virtually solving all of our economic problems within 1 year's time, if one wanted to do that. We're spending $300 billion on the military right now, and everyone says, well, it's a lot of money. The truth of the matter is probably, if you had a president of the United States who was concerned and wanted world peace, and if you had a leader of the Soviet Union who wanted world peace, and the Soviet Union's economy is being devastated also by military spending. They have many serious problems. And you lock these people in a room and you told them that we don't want to spend the hundreds of millions of dollars and rubles that they're spending, you could then significantly go a long way to wipe out economic problems in both of those countries. That's really true. That's really true, I believe.
Except that you've got a war economy that's funded by that, which is a whole other level.
Right, but I think you could deal with it, because I think there are many workers, correctly, who are scared, who are frightened about losing their jobs if they're in the war economy. And what you have got to do is guarantee to those workers, as you could, I believe. I mean, it's not simply closing down military plants. It's a question of spending that money in different directions that are desperately needed. So I think you can have a full employment economy, which is not based on war. But there aren't too many. How often does one hear that discussion, really?
And how many models of that are there? I mean, if we look at economic Western and Eastern economic systems, don't we find very much sustained by war economies?
Absolutely. There's close to $1 trillion being spent at a time when so many people are literally starving to death at any given day.
So how do we, is the solution to untangling this incredible symbiosis locking the two main world leaders in a room, or?
Well, I think that's a start. I think you can go further than that. Obviously, you're going to have to, and I'm not saying that it's easy and that it happens overnight. But the main point that I'm making is here is an issue, all of them, we're concerned in our own city. We have environmental problems in terms of our sewers that we want to be able to correct. It costs us millions and millions of dollars. We don't have the money to do that. We know that there are people who are in desperate need of improved health care and who can't afford it. We know that there are thousands of kids in Vermont who would like to go to college who can't afford that. I mean, we can tick off the financial needs that exist. Housing, my God, we need to build millions of units of housing. There are cities in America, not in Vermont, I should point out, but there are cities throughout America that are literally falling apart. Hundreds of thousands of people living out on the streets. There is tremendous need for spending in those directions. And yet we don't have the money available because we're propping up war economies all over the world. Not to mention that if you keep spending more and more money, as I think everybody realizes, you're eventually going to have a nuclear war. Where is that issue? Where is the understanding that you've got to change that and change that quickly? Who's debating that issue? Vermont State Legislature? No. United States Congress? Well, maybe a few people, but not more than a few people. But again, it just seems to me that when we get so bogged down on this detail and this detail, which you have to do, we are losing sight of what in fact are the most important things. I mean, use something else that I often get back to is the whole phenomenon of television. Television has extraordinary importance. Everybody understands that. Who is sitting around and saying, my God, here you have a technology which affects the lives of the entire country. Everybody watches television. The average American spends 40 hours a week on television. How come all you get on television, or 90% of what you get, is garbage? Who is sitting around saying that how can we use television to educate, entertain, improve communications, make a better society? Is that an issue that the Congress will be talking about? I don't think so. I don't think it will be mentioned. And yet anyone with any sense at all understands the tremendous impact of television. Is all the television should be used for, as it presently is the case, is to sell products.
Well, do you think that the people that you talk to, the one-on-one encounters that you have, you're talking to people who have very specific concerns, who may not be trained to be articulate as the business community or the intelligentsia is, but they can articulate what their concerns are. Do you think that they're cynical about television?
I would say, I don't know the answer to that. I think I've only had one experience in that area, and that was many, many years ago with Vermont Educational Television, actually. And what we found in that process is that people were really very interested in what was appearing on television. Some had strong feelings one way or the other. My guess would be, for example, well, what we also learned, I mean, I can tell you in dealing with cable TV, whether it's the French-speaking station, there was a great deal of concern about that, or the nature of programming. You know, we would like this station rather than that station. Yeah, I would say that there is a lot of concern. People spend a lot of time in front of the tube, and what they watch is, I think, important to people. And I would be willing to bet that if the Vermont State Legislature dealt with something like the quality of television, I think you would stimulate tremendous interest. We know there are many groups that are concerned about the violence that's on television, the impact that has on kids with sexism or racism or so forth. But if the government itself was willing to say that, yeah, we think that, the quality of television in terms of public health, if you like. All right, what we say in Burlington and in Vermont, you're not allowed to, dump garbage into the lakes. All right, we've said that that's important for health. And again, it's a tricky issue because I happen to believe very strongly in the right of freedom of expression. Presumably there's somebody outside there watching this program right now saying, this is garbage, get this program off the air. Who wants to hear this guy? But what I think is if one studies, as has been studied, the impact of television on people's lives, it's enormous. And there's very little real discussion about that. Who's going to discuss it?
Well, the question is, how do you raise the issue? Where's the responsibility to do so? And it seems to me that citizens are as responsible as government officials to raise the issue.
Right.
And so what happens is not so much that we place the burden of proof on the government to raise the issue, but to either maybe create an incentive for the dialogue or be listening carefully so that when community organization happens,
you're exactly right.
We've got a discussion.
But one of the problems, and the major problem, political problem that I see, is that for a wide variety of reasons, many, many people feel helpless about the process. So that if you go to people and you say, well, what do you think about the quality of television? You think it's good? I think you'll have large numbers of people saying, no, I really think it's a disgrace. I can't let my kids watch it, da-da-da-da. And then if you say, well, what do you intend to do about it? Well, What can I do about it? I'm just an ordinary citizen, you know? And I think it's no different than the frustration one feels about, you know, whether it's the destruction of Nicaragua or the spending of money on nuclear weapons or the total, in my view, total absurd priorities that exist. On the national level, I think there is a helplessness. There is nothing, frankly, that would make my job easier than a population in Burlington, Vermont that stood up and demanded improvements in the quality of their life. Because we consider ourselves here in Burlington to be a progressive government that's trying to fight for people. It is very hard to make that fight if it's perceived on the outside world that it's only a few people who are making that, well, there's Bernie Sanders. Well, there's Bernie Sanders and 10,000 people who would make a difference. For example, during even the last campaign for governor, what you realized is when farmers in the state of Vermont began to stand up and start dumping their milk, my God, didn't the state legislature and the governor make some rapid changes? We no longer have the same commissioner of agriculture. You know, the governor and the legislature are beginning to talk about, well, we have to deal with agriculture. Well, why? Because if we don't, the farmers are really upset. But if the farmers were not upset, then the legislature doesn't have to respond. And that's true of citizens in general. If people begin to stand up and fight for fair taxation. In other words, property tax, in my view, is a stupid way to fund education. We have very wealthy people who are paying less than they paid 5 years ago. That situation, frankly, is not going to change until people begin to stand up and you know, make it a tax revolt. Will that happen? I don't know. The problem is that many people, your average working person, works so hard. A person goes to work and they work 40 hours a week at a tough job, got to take care of their kids, they have illness in the family, da-da-da-da. It is asking an enormous amount for them to get involved in this and that, go to meetings over here. It is asking a whole lot. And very often people don't.
And that's a dilemma that you face constantly as a community organizer, number one, as a progressive, and as a public official, elected official. But it seems that you must be really encouraged in the past 6 years how more and more people have felt their power and have become more involved in the system. And how did you do that?
Well, I think we have done something, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I think we have done anywhere near enough. I was out knocking on doors, and I met a very nice, it was, you know, not some, you know, radical person, but I would say it would seem to me a pretty conservative couple, middle-aged couple. I think he worked at IBM. And he said something that I thought was very nice, in that he felt now the government does listen to people. In other words, in terms of the waterfront, okay? If anybody now tried to come forward with a proposal which would call for high-rise development or a rich person's waterfront, that would get laughed out. It couldn't be done now, because the climate in Burlington, while there are differences of opinion, has absolutely settled on the fact that we are going to have a people-oriented waterfront, which is open to all people, regardless of income. That decision clearly has been made, and any public official who tried to buck that decision would be out on his ear. But it's a different. There is a difference between trying to pick up and listen to what people want than hearing people actively involved. You could have, all it would require, for example, for the Vermont State Legislature to deal with the issue of property taxes, housing, daycare, healthcare, and a good state aid to education formula, all of the problems, agriculture, would be, all you would need is 5,000 people on any given Wednesday to go marching down to Montpelier with a list of demands, tell the legislature that's what they want, that's what you get.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. Because if you got 5,000 people down there, and the legislature and the governor would well understand that those 5,000 were really speaking for many, many more thousands, you get that. But so long as people are not able to be mobilized, then the legislature can pretty well go its own way, and they'll assume that people don't know what's going on anyhow, which is probably true. I think, you know, as I look at what the legislative priorities are, it's almost like a joke. I mean, it makes one, and I don't want to just focus on the Vermont State Legislature. I mean, I think it's true of many governments, that probably they could disband in a week and go home, because I don't know that they're going to be really dealing with significant problems. And they're never going to deal. They're not going to deal with significant problems until the people themselves says, look, we can't afford higher property taxes. You have got to do something. Okay? We can't afford higher telephone bills and higher electric bills. Solve that problem. The cost of health situation, which is a joke in this country, where people are afraid to get sick. You have to deal with that. But the system basically tries to tell people, A, that's not a political issue to begin with. What's healthcare? We're not even going to talk about healthcare. Or maybe only in a very limited way. Or B, that if it's an issue, there's really nothing that we can do about it. Well, who can do something about it? basically it tries to tell people that the problems are all very confusing, they're complicated, we can't do anything about it anyhow, so just grin and bear. You know, that's the way that people say, oh, gee, I can't do anything about it. So why do I bother to vote? So half the people don't even vote, you know. And it goes on and on and on. So the major, you know, I think the major challenge is to get people involved, to get people to understand they have the rights to stand up and fight for what they are entitled to as human beings. And once that process begins, and you've seen it, I mean, history is resplendent with all of these, whether it's the women's movement, or the black movement in America, or the labor movement of America, whenever people begin to stand up and fight for their rights, they get it. Because government almost has to respond. But what you will get is when people are confused and are led to believe that they are powerless, then life goes on merrily, the rich will get richer.
And so you would say then that the background of assumptions with which we as citizens operate in this country is as citizens without power.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is something that was very intriguing to me when we were in Nicaragua, was that every citizen there felt they had control over their destiny.
They made a revolution, of course. And of course the lies that, I mean, you're not, I don't even want to get into that issue, the whole way the Nicaraguan revolution has been treated, the absolute, I mean, one of the interesting things, and I'm sure it'll be misinterpreted, so I'll say this slowly, is, you know, some of the right-wing people are saying, my God, the press and the media are picking on poor President Reagan. And in a sense, they're right. In a sense, they're really right. Here is Reagan, who, as everybody knows, for the last 5 years has said out loud, the guy's an honest guy, he says, we intend to destroy the government of Nicaragua. We don't like it. We're going to overthrow that government. The Democrats and Republicans in Congress, they all raised their hands to give money. So the poor guy, everyone has said this. Now, you know, what many Americans don't know is the International Court of Justice, of course, said that what the United States was doing was illegal. You remember CIA mined the port in Nicaragua. We went to war against those people. No problem. The United Nations almost overwhelmingly, every other day, overwhelmingly votes against the United States. No problem. It's okay. President Reagan and the Congress went on their merry way. Now, for whatever reason, maybe because the Democrats gained control of the Senate, I don't know. Suddenly, the guy for mere $10, $20, $30 million is caught with his pants down. Everyone is turning on the guy. And you know, to me, it's almost absurd. He has been saying that we intend to violate the law. Law doesn't mean anything else. We're going to overthrow that government and cause them terrible suffering. He's been saying this for 5 years. Now what, for a mere 10 or 20 or $30 million, they've been violating the law for years. Everybody who wants to know it knows it. And suddenly, they have 85 different investigations. And what really gets me, this is interesting, in the midst of all of these investigations about how the Iranian money ended up going, you know, this weapons deal ended up going to Nicaragua, I haven't yet heard that the Congress is willing to even debate, once again, the moral issue of whether the United States has the right to overthrow the government. So what they're really saying is, well, if we vote to kill somebody legally, that's okay. But to do it illegally, if I stab you in the daytime, that's okay. But doing it in the night, hey, that's not the American way. And the absurdity of this thing, the front pages still lie. I mean, over and over again, you pick up the paper and they keep talking about the communist government of Nicaragua. Government of Nicaragua does not consider itself communist.
Marxist-Leninist government.
Marxist-Leninist, the terrorist government. You know, the lies continue. But for whatever reason, which is interesting, I don't know, maybe the media got bored with Reagan or they got upset that he has, I mean, obviously his relationship to the media, and he's been spoon-feeding them for 6 years, and maybe they got a little bit tired and a little bit angry and they turned on him.
Well, they need to look like they were doing their job.
But their real job, and if they wanted to really do their job, they can expose the whole morality of what has been going on in Nicaragua. And in a sense, one almost feels sorry. The poor guy must not know what's happening to him. He's been doing this thing for 5 or 6 years, doing the same damn thing, and now everybody is turning on him because, you know, he's tried to destroy Nicaragua. Well, I don't know.
Well, you can make that case for the liberal press very much in this instance, but as you say, what they're still not doing is questioning the background of assumptions.
Right, and I have not heard the Congress saying, we want to rethink whether or not we want to support this band of murderers to overthrow the legitimate government of Nicaragua. I haven't heard that. I haven't heard that at all.
And no one's really discussed the role of the military. I mean, barely spoken about how these decisions are made underneath the administration.
Right.
So it's time. Okay.
Another quick half hour.
Another episode. Bernie speaks with the community.